Stop me if you've heard this before. This week we got a brand new X-Men debut with Storm #1. This time we've got Murewa Ayodele and Lucas Wernick. And here to talk to me about Storm is the X-Men fanatic, the aficionado. Doc, how you doing?
I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to review, well, I'm not happy to review Storm #1, but I'm happy that somebody other than me attempted to pronounce the name of the writer on this. I didn't even know that it was a dude.
Interesting enough, I think the plot itself and what Storm is doing is perfectly fine and acceptable for an X-Men plot, even a #1 for Storm. You know, it does set her up in her own unique direction, you know, overcoming things, highlighting what she can do as a hero and some of the pitfalls of what she's going through right now. But this comic book, to me, really just fails on characterization alone. The way she uses her powers and what she's capable of just feels like a completely different character in this book.
Her being able to essentially use the weather to do anything ever. Any amount of stakes in it didn't exist. It was a giant nothing comic. Otherwise, I mean, it wasn't that it was bad, it was just boring.
Not exactly the most exciting book in the history of the world. Let's get into this bad boy because we will start out with the art from Lucas Wernick. And I think the art, for the most part, it actually looks pretty good.
I never really generally have much of a problem with Lucas Wernick. As long as he has enough lead time on a project, he's really good. I actually prefer him doing female characters to male characters. He does suffer from same face with women. If it wasn't for the glasses and the different clothing on Frenzy and Storm, I wouldn't have been able to tell them apart. The art on this starts out with 4 pages of her just going through her wardrobe so that they could decide on a new costume for her. That's the big thing in it. Oh, you get to see that Lucas Wernick knows that she wore a bunch of different costumes, but seems to only really notice the ones where she has either a mohawk or very short hair. The art on this was perfectly fine and actually halfway decent in storytelling, but for the most part was just bland with very boring camera angles.
Moving over to the characterization, which me personally, I had an issue with the way that they were treating and presenting the Aurora Monroe Storm character. She's decided she's going to run for Congress because something has happened in Oklahoma City that has changed people's opinions on mutants. Of course, we only see it in this book because every other book out there, mutants are hated and feared more than ever, and rightfully so because of all the murder that they committed. And the way that the character handles herself, and she has been, admittedly the queen of Wakanda, but I don't ever remember her treating herself as if she was royalty and regal. I feel like she's lost her humanity.
The minute they made her the quote-unquote regent of Mars and the queen of the solar system, that's when Storm stopped being Storm at all.
That's an essential part of who Storm is. She loves everybody, and she's very relatable, and she's the one person on the team that everyone can talk to.
She's gone through these phases where she tries to put on a really brave face and be above it all and try to be the matriarch. But at the same time, she's incredibly vulnerable. And this is all distant.
Yeah, I didn't like almost like the deification of the character by the writer itself. He thinks that she's the god of the mutants. And that's the way I feel like she's being treated. Not only the way that she handles herself, but the way everyone, including her PR person and even Frenzy, are reacting to her when she's in the room as if the fucking Queen of England is there.
They're all still acting like she's the queen of fucking Mars.
One of the weird things about her history, obviously, she was actually worshipped as a goddess at one point, but she rejected that because she realized she wasn't a god.
Once she grew up a little bit and kind of became an adult, she really rejected being treated that way. And every time she went back to Africa, they'd try to treat her like the goddess again. She would always push back against it. It's the reason why I never understood her as the fucking queen of Wakanda. That is the last thing she'd ever want to be.
Even when she goes out to save people, because we finally do go back in time to what happened in Oklahoma City. She and Frenzy show up and they're talking and Storm's like, I'm here to perform miracles. Basically saying, I'm a god. She's almost like a Masonic type of character in here. They're discovering that the streets of Oklahoma City are basically barren because there's been this nuclear reactor in Oklahoma City that's blown up or something like that. And even as she's saving people, She's got like this weird suit thing on and high heels. It looks like she's doing a photo op rather than being a superhero. And I thought it completely missed the mark of showing Storm who she is, going out there and saving people because she needed to look at her fucking apex doing it.
I'm never one to really give shit about how they look. I have completely different issues with this entire scene. First of all, nothing here even resembles a nuclear event. That's not how they work. Shock waves, aftershocks, whatever, those don't happen with nuclear power. Like, it's a really steady stream because once you break containment, it's just shooting out fucking radioactive energy. Anybody that took like a physics 101 class should have understood that this doesn't work.
That's another weird thing, because you know that I'm an electronic signals analyst by trade. And certainly you can out of phase a signal if you go on the exact same frequency, essentially with the same amount of power. And if you're 180 degrees out of phase with a sinusoidal signal, it will cancel itself out.
Yeah.
But that's not how shockwaves work. And if she was to cancel out a shockwave, she kind of has powers that could, in theory, perhaps do that. Because one of the things that makes shockwaves really different than other types of waveforms is that they rapidly change the temperature and like pressures. She can change temperature and pressure with her powers, but he has her like using a storm to create an oscillating frequency to phase it out. And that makes no fucking sense either with the shockwave or with Storm and her powers.
It was supposedly like the nuclear materials that were being released in shockwaves. But that's not how it works. That's just how it's portrayed on fucking in a goddamn G.I. Joe cartoon where they have it like womp, 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 because there's no way to portray radiating. We could apply rule of cool, except for it's just boring. It would have made more sense if it was like a giant coal-fired plant or a gas plant.
So I guess maybe the reason that there were shockwaves isn't because of the nuclear meltdown, which they assume is because the engineers fucked everything up. But it turns out that's not the case. There's actually a little boy at the heart of it. And maybe he's the one that's pulsing out, I guess, shockwaves. But this is an enormous problem for Aurora because everyone at this point believes that it was caused by human malfeasance. But really, it's because you've got this mutant coming of age and his X gene kicked in. And there's a really weird part that they put in here that's the inner monologue of Storm. And she says, for many mutants, however, it's a day of true dread, talking about their X gene kicking in. Unable to control the birth of new abilities, manslaughter is not as rare as you would expect.
Hey, maybe that mutant registration thing wasn't the worst thing in the world if just merely hitting puberty will often or even fairly frequently result in other people dying.
That's a crazy fucking thing to put in there.
This is absurd. You're not keeping me sympathetic to the mutant plight. The whole point of not registering mutants was the humans saying there's a lot of times where people will just accidentally kill folks while their powers are activating because they don't know how to control them. We have to make sure these people are able to be controlled, so we have to make sure that we know who they are so that we're able to protect other people from them. And the mutants argument has always been that is an exceedingly rare event. Well, now apparently it's an admission that it's a fairly frequent event, which then undermines the entire mutant argument against registration.
Yeah, it was pretty wild that they put that in there, but it leaves Storm with a couple of predicaments. First off, she has radiation poisoning, and it's certainly hinted at that she might be very, very sick. Also, she wants to run for Congress, and people have a favorable opinion of her because she saved the city because, you know, the engineers are the ones that screwed up, but it wasn't the engineers. It was actually a mutant. And she does make the hard choice, and I did like this moment where Storm actually admitted that it was actually a mutant that caused all these problems. But then it gets even worse because she talks about the way that she's going to fix this is she's going to create sanctuary cities that levitate and block the sun from real cities.
The logic in this fucking book is completely asinine. First of all, why was there a fucking pubescent child in the center of a nuclear reactor? Was he the power?
I thought they were going to come out and say that he was the one powering it.
I thought so too. But it isn't. He was just a random pubescent child in a nuclear reactor, but it wasn't actually a nuclear reactor. It was some like alien kaiju that they had captured and used as a power source. So it wasn't even actually a nuclear reactor unless the alien kaiju is nuclear powered. But apparently some random pubescent child ended up in the reactor, his powers activated at that time, and blew the whole thing to shit. The engineers had actually had everything running correctly. Like, it was the most out of left field bullshit I have ever seen in a comic. Like, the whole inciting incident here doesn't make any rational sense, except for to get you to the result of, put Storm into the moral conflict of, do I lie and protect the mutant and disgrace the name of the dead engineers, or do I admit that the engineers had everything fine and this fucking mutant activating blew it all to shit and fucked it all up? Well, she opted to go for the truth, which is...
But how does the sanctuary cities that are going to hover around real cities, and there's going to be more than one, how does that fix anything?
It doesn't. None of the actual plot parts of this make any sense. Things just happen because that's where the next plot beat has to go to tell whatever story this dude is trying to tell. So somehow floating sky cities above cities, first of all, where in the fuck did she somehow get all the money for this? But if she's doing it, these mutants sometimes, when they activate, they don't have no ability to control their powers, and terrible devastation can happen. Let's put it above the city.
I thought you couldn't identify a mutant until their X gene activated.
You can't unless you genetically test them.
Why wouldn't you put this in Texas?
Yeah,
or Oklahoma or someplace without a large population centers?
Yeah, put it in rural fucking Kansas. Like, buy up a bunch of land so that if somebody decides their power activates and they turn into a walking nuclear warhead and they explode, nobody dies. Do you know where nuclear bombs are programmed to explode? About 500 feet above the fucking city.
In the atmosphere to be the most
devastation.
Most
yes.
And the weird thing is, Doc, I do believe the idea of Storm running for Congress and then realizing this thing that she had done where she had gone to Oklahoma City, she'd saved some families, realized that a mutant was at the center of it, and had the moral conundrum of having to tell the truth or lie about it, and telling the truth, taking the harder road, is perfectly fine for a plot.
Yes.
It's just the execution and the characterization that just totally fucked everything up.
I guess, but all the logic in this is terrible too. All of the intricacy, all of the execution is just miserable.
Except for the art, which I do think is good. Yeah. Me personally, I give this like a 3 out of 5, 6 out of 10. It's better than most of the other stuff in the X-Men line, but that's not saying anything. This firmly would go into the whatever category, probably, certainly above Phoenix.
Well, it's above Phoenix. It's above NYX. It's above X Factor. It's above Exception. No, it's on par with Exceptional X-Men.
I think it's better than that.
I don't, because look, Exceptional X-Men was terribly plotted and terrible characterization. This only had a very, 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 if you're looking at the 100,000 foot view of the plot, that was the only part of this is good. And honestly, the art was better than Exceptional X-Men. So while Exceptional X-Men had a slightly better plot, that had worse art, this has better art, worse plot. I give it a 2 out of 5.
There you go. We're still waiting on that big winner. I don't think we're getting it.
Because there isn't one to be had.
I do want to say thank you very much to Doc and invite you all, if you would like to see the entire or listen to the entire review of Storm number 1. We did go about 30 minutes. There is a link in the video description to Think Critical Patreon. You support Doc and I there on the Doc is Right tier, and you get that. You get the Q&A. You get all the audio recordings of all the videos we there. You can listen to them on Spotify, all that kind of stuff. Hope to see you there really soon.